the end-to-end journey of the user and how we can apply privacy concepts across it. We make the decision to actually build a lot of the privacy platforms, or most of them, in-house. With all of the investments that we're making towards privacy user experience, that score keeps going up. And to a large extent, it's also about the perception of the type of data that you're collecting.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, we've got Ansuman Acharya here. He serves as a principal product manager at Airbnb, where he leads the design and development of innovative privacy experiences that you may have already interacted with. With a foundation in privacy technology and user-centric design, he combines engineering with product leadership and ethical values. Ansuman spent 11 years at Microsoft. Before this, holds a Master's in Information Systems from the University of Washington's Foster School and a Bachelor's degree in Computer Science Engineering from NIT Rourkela in India. With him, I have finally understood what we mean when we talk about privacy user experience. Many of you will surely guess as well, but you may be missing the little details that make this a very promising career and a very useful set of skills to have in any product team. Or so I think. Let's go for it. Ansuman, thanks for joining me.
Well, pleased to be here. Thanks for having me, Sergio.
It's a pleasure. So, privacy user experience. What do you understand falls within that umbrella?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually, before I answer, I think I have to say that having worked at Airbnb for the last 4 years, which is a very design-led company, it was almost like natural to think about privacy from a user experience perspective because we are so focused on user experience as a company. But what I think of as privacy user experience, broadly speaking, is how a user comes across all of these different concepts that we discuss in privacy in the context of our industry through their user experience. And it not necessarily is just the user experience in software, but it's also like the user experience in the real world. Because for Airbnb, a small part of the user experience is actually booking the trip, but then there's a large part, which is actually when you show up at the house or you go on an experience. So what privacy means in terms of, your information, your personality, how you express yourself, all of that is privacy user experience to us. So we think about the end-to-end journey of the user and how we can apply privacy concepts across it. And that's how we approach privacy user experience.
Okay, so then to start from something that is very easy to understand, which is transparency principles, before we engage with accountability and user rights. So we need to tell people how data is being collected, what the rights are, and so on. How do you see transparency, and are there enough levers in there for you to play with?
Yeah. I think transparency is like the first principle, right? You always start there. That's the place to start. And actually we have a principle at Airbnb internally that we call show your cards first, in a poker analogy, right? As a company, you have to show your cards first to the user, right? That's radical transparency. If your users have to hunt for the privacy story, you already lost them, right? They shouldn't be hunting for the privacy story. It should be really, really easy for them to understand what you're doing, right? I mean, you can think of it as like with their data, but also like the architecture of your system, how you're sharing their information, who is it being shared with, and all of that. So for us, really where we start with is in context. So when we're collecting that information from a user, or we're using that information, or we're sharing it, at that point, we would love to educate the user about what's happening so that they can understand. Beyond that, we will have things like help articles where they can read about the entire feature and understand in easy user-friendly language about what data we're using, how we're collecting it, who we're sharing it with. And then the third stop is the more legal document, which is, something like a privacy policy and or supplements. But that's usually our progression. And as far as possible, we would like to create transparency in the product UI and in the experience itself. And again, like if you have to make your users read through long policies to understand how you're using their data, I think you just lose them. And in today's day and age, the show your cards first approach, I think, is a differentiator between companies that are trusted and companies that are not. So we would like to be in the first camp.
Two takes on that. One is that you want to have less cards because it's easier to explain. And that would be a reason why you would look at data minimization as another principle. So you collect less data, not because it is going to have an impact on the experience, because it doesn't have it. It's something that happens behind the scenes, right? You just collect less data. But the other one is that you want to be able to explain things in a simple way, in an easy way. So is there a connection between that, between data minimization and the experience? Or it's just unrelated and simply you work with whatever you know you need to collect and then just simply make it an amazing experience, no matter how much data you collect, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle that you've taken, Sergio. We actually have, again, another internal principle. We call it pack light, right? Like when you fly, pack light. So the safest data is the data that you don't collect, right? But, it's always a balance between like business goals and needs versus like privacy goals. In this case, like data minimization and transparency. We have to be very careful and deliberate about like what we're collecting and if we truly need it. Just because it's a good principle from a GDPR perspective to minimize data, but you're absolutely right. If you collect a lot of things and then you have to explain like how you use them, right? It makes for a very complicated story to users as well. I don't think that's the primary driver of like, whether you need to collect certain information or not, but it is an important driver because if you have a super long list of things that you need to show on a UI that you're collecting, it starts to feel like, like really overwhelming to the user and like kind of creates that question of like, well, why are they collecting so much information, right? That itself is a red flag in a way. So data minimization and explaining that data minimization on the UI, I think are related concepts. And we take that into consideration, how we would explain the data, in a just-in-time disclosure as well when we think about like, data. And to a large extent, it's also about the perception of the type of data that you're collecting, right? So not every data or data point is the same, right? When you're collecting somebody's race, that's quite different from you're collecting somebody's first name, like it's quite different, or you're collecting somebody's precise geolocation. So we think very carefully about how users perceive our app and like our company and like what we're doing and try and connect like the data points that we're collecting and see if it fits in that broader framework or not usually. And we evaluate that before deciding for an individual use case if we want to collect that data or not. So that is also something that's built into our kind of like our evaluation fabric or like even privacy assessment process, if you will.
Yep. Very good. Yeah. To me, I'm still trying to get my head around this, right? Because again, a company that is so focused on design, this is very well connected with the idea you said layered notice and something that naturally happens at the very time that you're collecting. You mentioned just in time. notices. So it is true that if you have a gigantic privacy notice, that's always something that people do not read. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
your stats, and you can see that. But a place where you do have a big impact, and you presented this at Pepper last year, is consent. So gathering consent and making sure that the experience is really well integrated with the entire system so that it flows nicely. How do you see that? So when you're collecting consent, do you have a big impact? I mean, in the end, the one thing that I gathered is that you cared so much about the experience that you took control over the very development of the CMP, right?
Yes, that is absolutely right. I mean, we at Airbnb, a lot of the privacy platforms that we've built, like, we built them in-house because we wanted complete control over like what the end user experience is, right? To a large extent, like you cannot control the user experience unless you build the underlying systems that power it. And therefore, like, we make the decision to actually build a lot of the privacy platforms, or most of them in-house, right? So that's true. With consent specifically, and I think you're talking about cookie, and or tracker consent specifically. I think our focus is really to create the simplest experience on the banner that a user can understand and granularly give them control over all of the trackers that we're, kind of like setting on the platform, right? So that's kind of our mantra there. And, like it's always a balance, right? Between like what is what is the goals of the marketing team, right? Versus, what is the goals of the privacy team and what's the right thing for the user. So we've tried to balance that in our design, but really like the main goal is that the user should understand like what trackers are, what our trackers are about to drop, how they're grouped, and what they have choice over. So we have strictly necessary ones, and users can't really opt out of that. But we want to make it very, very clear why these are strictly necessary, right? Users should understand that. And then, oh, these are functional, these are targeting, these are performance. So we want those categories to be very easily understood to users because a lot of it is like privacy jargon and users may not nearly understand it. So we focus on explaining that very well, even within the constructs of the banner and the cookie preferences page. And to do that, we needed to build it all ourselves. The other thing, that we really try for is to make the choice very, very clear that users, can accept only the strictly necessary cookies and reject everything else. A lot of the banners that are out there, don't really make that easy. They really nudge the user to just accept everything. And that is not something that we want. We want the choice to be really, really clear because otherwise it's not really, like explicit consent the way it should be. So that's something we prioritized and focused on and, made, or when we built our cookie banner.
Very good. So that raises another question. Most people, so whenever I look at a design or think of the user experience, I think of A/B testing. In the old times, A/B testing,
Yeah.
multivariate testing, and you checking different versions and see what works and what doesn't. But there's going to be a goal that you measure things against. And if the goal is simply higher consent rates, then yes, then I do not see how you're not going to end up nudging people to agree to something they do not understand
Yeah.
well. If the goal is more human-centric, I'll say, which is let's make sure people understand what they're doing, which I think is amazing. How do you do that? How can you measure for that? I guess you need to do some sort of focus groups to know whether they how does
Correct.
that work to know that people really get it?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's hard to measure those things through an experiment, through like key data points. So we have a variety of mechanisms that work more offline. So we look at so we have feedback tool on the app. So users submit feedback about things they can't understand. We make that easy. We look at CS tickets and contacts, right? That's another thing to like understand like what users are struggling. We also have like an inbox, the DPO inbox, DPO at Airbnb.com, and people sometimes will write. Obviously, those that are very privacy conscious, they will write to those, like inboxes, but we still monitor it and track it and triage all of those. We also send surveys to users, and we essentially have this notion of a privacy confidence score internally, where we ask a bunch of questions to users, and there can be things related to the cookie banner there as well where we essentially try to distill from the answers to those questions, which are on a scale of like like not great to like really great, like a 5 point scale usually, we'll distill like a transparency and a control score. And we track that over time, right? And we want to make sure that with all of the investments that we're making towards privacy user experience, that score keeps going up. And it's a pretty wide scale survey with thousands of guests and hosts. And we keep an eye on that every month, and we keep pushing it towards the top right, where we want like that score to keep increasing. And then, specifically, we will do like usability testing as well. So, like for the banner, if we're making a change, we will want to show that to like 15 guests from different countries around the world because we're a global company, and sort of ask them, hey, does this make sense? Are you understanding it? Is it clear? So all of those practices are applied to privacy features and controls as well. When we're about to launch them or as we're launching them. And then we have these at scale mechanisms as well to understand like if users, are feeling that Airbnb is being transparent, is giving them control through these surveys and scores.
Yes, and I'm also thinking that because you're global, a global approach is always delicate. And I've seen, for example, that's something that you do. You've got a global policy. I know when you go into the legal one, which is, of course, when we take it from a very nerdy legal perspective, as many people here listening will approach it this way. You have a global policy and then specifics for different regions. Like if you're in China, this is for you. If you're out of the US, there's this section. But there's going to be cultural differences. So what people believe is clear, so as per the GDPR, clear and concise sort of rules over legal jargon. But there's going to be that, right? Where in some cultures they want to go deeper, and some others want to simply have a sort of cartoon or I don't know, something very simple. Does that happen? Are we all the same? Are we just simply want the same simple language?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think let me just step back and explain our process around that. So first of all, like, as we know, every country and state is kind of building its own privacy regulation model, like originally kind of inheriting from the GDPR in some ways, or most of the time. So we have our own like internal standard called the air privacy standard, where we've looked at like all of these regulations and what's changing, even what's coming in the pipeline. Like for example, we know that India has something coming, so we look at all of those, and we incorporate different parts of it and create our own privacy standard, which we feel is kind of a high bar for our company and what makes sense given our business model and that we're a travel company, right? So we have that, and everything we built is has to match that spec, and that's our reference for it. In terms of user experience, I think usually what works is like just creating something that is very simple and easy for users to understand. um, to a large extent, like users of consumer apps everywhere, like, there's one thing in common, which is they just don't have a lot of attention, like to give you, right? You have to make it super simple. Otherwise, they'll just drop off or move on to the next thing. I think that applies like to privacy as well. And the important thing about privacy is it's often an abstract concept, and you have to make them understand it like very, very quickly. So I'd say like we don't really do anything that's different like per country or per geography in that. We just try to make it absolutely simple and explain things in plain English, right? And obviously we localize that, and our localization and translation teams are very, very experts at like making sure that the meaning is not lost. And so they make sure that like whatever is that simple English explanation that we create is translated very well into other languages, and it grabs the user attention, and really they focus on it before they make their decision. But if, in the example of consent, for example.
So now going to the next level in terms of sophistication, right? First, we've got transparency, so notices, then consent, and layered the first sort of kind of interaction. And now we go a bit deeper. So data subject access requests, data subject requests. Something that I appreciate in your platform, for example, is that there's a difference between what I can do before I log in.
Yeah.
What I can see is a sort of, regular sort of anonymous user, so I can read all this stuff. And then the fact that once you know I'm logged on, and once you know that I'm into my account, why would you ask me all over again whether this is me? I'm already in, so make it easy. If I want to download my data, all I need to do is simply say I want to do it, and then you'll verify my number, I'll get a little message, a code, and I'll wait for 7 days. It will start rolling. I really like that. How do you approach that? How have you come to develop that? If you had a hand in that, how
Yeah.
do you see that part? Data subject
Yeah,
rights.
absolutely. I definitely had a hand in that. I think before I joined the company, a lot of the operations around it were more manual, and I worked on automating it with our engineering team and our legal and design teams. So yeah, you're right about it. Except like in most cases, you should get it before 7 days,
Oh,
the
fantastic!
access
Thank you.
and portability packet, as far as I know. Um, so the way we sort of like thought about that experience, and I think you're talking specifically about one type of data subject right, which is the right to access and portability. There are many others, right? But our principles of approaching them are usually very similar. So there are certain rights that we have to enable for visitors as well, not just like logged in users. For those, we'll try to place the control somewhere which is accessible to visitors. For example, for the California Privacy Rights Act, the opt out of sale share, we made sure that the control is basically like a link on off of the footer on the homepage and takes you to a separate page where you can just opt out, right? And we consume those signals and we make sure that we persist it. So when you log in, the same signals kind of get carried over and we kind of, like use that and like honor your opt out. But for things like access and portability, you need to be logged in because really, like, it's if you're a user, we have like all of this data for you, and we try to like collect that and package it up to give it to you. So when it came to the design of that, I think the way we kind of like tried to approach it was in a few steps. So the first step is we have to authenticate you, right? Because it's really important. Like it's like very sensitive data. It's your entire like Airbnb data. We don't want to give that to a stranger or like an unknown person or a bad actor, right? So we make sure that we have the right frictions, the right two-factor authentication in place. In certain cases, it can be even three factors, depending on some internal risk assessments from the trust side. But we will basically challenge you appropriately, and if you pass the challenges, then we essentially take in that request, and internally we will fan out that request to a bunch of data services and then start collecting that information. Once that information is collected, we have another service that packages up that information in a way that makes sense to users, and then we kind of compile it, and then we send you a notification that it's ready, and then you can download it. Also, we make sure that the download is only available for 7 days, so it expires because we don't
Yeah.
want that to be available for very long for security reasons in case something bad happens. So we think that 7 days is a reasonable time for somebody to like get an email, and we actually send another email too if you haven't downloaded and it's about to expire. So you get that, and then you can download that, and it's a zip file, and then you can do what you want with it. So that's kind of our framework for access and portability. It's very similar for other ones as well, like erasure and a few other things. And we're constantly building like new types of data subject rights as we mature as a company, and we start to play with like things like more with AI and personalization as well. But it's the same framework.
Fantastic. Yes, so that's the next one, of course, AI. I'm sorry, I can't help
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
This is what everyone is doing
yeah,
now. So there's always a notice somewhere, a little change in the privacy
yeah,
notice. We'll use this for training. Have you had to deal with that, and how will you
yeah.
make it part of the whole transparency effort and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the real answer is we're working through it right now as a company. But what we have is a way for users today to write in to us and have their data not be used for training, right? And we have that process already set up. But what we really need to build is an actual user-facing control for that. So we're already working on that. I can't reveal like a whole lot about it, but the thing, as we started working on it, we started to and doing some research on it, it became very clear that most lay users, right, don't really understand the difference between training and inference and processing and all of this, right? So as a company that's focused on the user experience, what we need to do is to just do the right thing for the users and make it super duper simple for them. So we're thinking about it in two or three different vectors. So the first vector is basically like use of their data to improve our product. right? Which includes like, using it for, training models, building other analyses and those types of things. So we might one day, create a control that allows users to like opt out of their use of data for improving our product, right? For everyone. So that would be one kind of control. The other would be as we personalize our app, a whole lot, we want to let some users that don't want that personalization to just opt out of all types of personalization that is happening. And that will include the processing of their data to create that personalization. So we'll just take care of it. They don't have to worry about, like training, inference that is used to make that personalization work through AI or ML models. So if they opt out of personalization, we won't use their data. We will not give them a personalized experience. They'll get a vanilla or a very neutral experience, right? And then beyond that, I think what we want to do is be super transparent and explain how our personalization actually works, right? Which is interesting. So if you assume the framework is that, hey, Sergio, we're actually like, you're doing a bunch of activity on Airbnb, and we're collecting those signals, and we're using those to create some labels for you, right, internally. How do we show those to you so that you know that, hey, you've told Airbnb a set of things, and then Airbnb has inferred a set of things. And by the way, when it infers those things, it's going to tell you that, hey, Sergio, I think you're visiting Barcelona, you're going to all these experiences. We think you like architecture, right? So when we infer that, we're going to tell you that, hey, we're inferring this. Like, is that right? So it becomes like a way for being transparent, but it also becomes a way to get feedback on our models and like, is that accurate or not, right? So we would show you. And then long run, there should be like a place for you to go see everything that we've collected about you, that you've told us, that we've inferred, and understand how that's derived from the different data sources and control that. And basically control your personalized experience. So that's kind of the direction we're going. But again, as I said, we're working on it. It's not there yet. It will follow the personalization that actually happens on the app. But that's our framework for, in our case, like for the use of AI and like personalization.
Fantastic, Ansuman. You're on a great mission.
Yeah, it's basically, privacy is never done, right? Like it's always, work that keeps going, that, is focused on doing the right thing for our users as the company like invests in new directions, new technology, new product areas, new offerings. So I think the job of the privacy team, at least in our case, is to just, enable the business and protect our users' rights at the same time. So sometimes it's a challenging mission, but other times it's also a very rewarding mission. I think to be able to fulfill this, kind of fundamental right for our users, and also just, for us as a design-led company, the goal always is to make privacy as simple and intuitive as possible for our users. And I think that in itself is a pretty rewarding experience.
Very good. Well, thank you, Ansuman. Thanks again.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Sergio.
Okay, that's all for today. Follow us on Blue Sky and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. There is also a Masters of Privacy LinkedIn channel, which I invite you to follow, where you will find links to our transcripts, cheat sheets, and other surprises every now and then. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.